The meeting of June 27th, 2022 is called to order. May I have a roll call, please?
Sure. Carson.
Here.
Feiner.
Here.
Steiger Muck.
Here.
Atkins Ori.
Present, virtually.
And Young.
Here.
Mr. Chair, we have quorum.
Thank you. Any changes to the minutes of May 2, 2022? In that case, may I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Carson.
Yes.
Feiner.
Yes.
Steiger Muck.
Yes.
Atkins Ori.
Yes.
Young.
Yes.
Motion to approve passes.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the election of a vice chair. And I think we had some email votes and possibly ballots, written ballots. Do we have a result of that election process?
Sure, Mr. Chair. So I do have an update. I did receive 2 votes via email. And then if the members of the board who have not yet submitted a vote will go ahead and just write it down on the paper, I will come around and collect those.
Did I not yet vote? Is that why I got a ballot? I don't remember. I'll vote anyway if you want me to.
Yes, please.
Unless I contradict my vote.
All votes count.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
With 3 votes, Aaron Atkins Ori has been nominated by the majority of the board.
I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
With 3 votes, Aaron Atkins Ori has been has received a majority of the votes for vice chair.
Okay, thank you. Then she will be serving as vice chair for the rest of the term. And the term is, if I recall correctly, Blake, it's a year?
Yes, I don't remember when the terms start. It's in your rules. It's in the spring.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
And maybe just one point of confirmation with the city attorney's office is that something that we do need a motion and a vote on, or is the vote that we've taken sufficient?
That vote is sufficient.
Okay.
Thank you. New business, BOA 2022-0011. May we have a staff report, please?
Sure. One moment, Mr. Chair. So this project is in South Fayetteville. It is on the northwest corner of the intersection of East Huntsville and South Happy Hollow Roads. The property is approximately 0.59 acres. It is zoned C2 thoroughfare commercial, and it's currently developed with a commercial structure and 2 accessory shop buildings. There's an existing structure that was built in 1940, and at that time it operated as a Sinclair gas station. Today the property is the site of Tuba Trucks. It is an antique truck restoration business. And just to give an idea of some of the surrounding context, to the north are primarily single family dwellings. The south we've got Beard's Funeral Chapel. East is a mix of single family residential, but there's also the Lighthouse Baptist Church, and then to the west is Cox Accounting Services before it starts to get developed more residentially. The applicant is requesting a variance of the C2 zoning district's front building setback requirements. In their request letter, the applicant says they would like to construct carports near the front property line to assist in accommodating service and repair operations and increase customer volume and improving the aesthetics and functionality of the the property. The applicant proposes or asserts that the front setback creates an excess of unusable space on the property, and it prohibits locating the carport inside a fenced area and on top of some concrete paving, which would be necessary to protect customer property. Staff, when evaluating it, the proposal under the consideration for a site-specific hardship, we do not find that the applicant is meeting the criteria for an undue hardship. C2 at this location would have a 50-foot front setback, and that is basically in instances where there is parking allowed between the street and the building. They've got a little bit greater front setback. Staff does acknowledge that front setback encumbers a significant portion of the property. The location of, but even acknowledging that, we find that the location that they're choosing to propose to locate the structures is a self-imposed restriction. That's based on the existing conditions of the site. That would be, the paved surfaces, fencing, and the portion of the property that's used for some residential purposes that would likely need to be rebuilt, relocated, or reconfigured. Staff recognizes that while that undeniably represents a substantial cost, a similar structure could be located in an alternative location, and the site itself doesn't have any constraints that requires it be built up near to the front property line. On the other hand, just acknowledging some of the constraints with that significant setback, the developable portion of the property is heavily reduced given that requirement. The property totals roughly 0.59 acres, and only about 0.29 acres, or 49% of it, lies outside of the front setback area. And also, since the property is already developed with multiple structures, most of which that are conforming, the options to rezone could be limited or could pose other challenges to development and redevelopment of the site, since they would have to conform to a new set of zoning regulations. Compounding that is this business falls under Use Unit 17, which is only permitted in a handful of districts. And with the exception of I-1, which is heavy commercial and light industrial, each of the districts where it would be allowed has an associated minimum buildable street frontage requirement. And that means that all new structures would need to be built close to the street. And given that rezoning would make all of the current structures on the property non-conforming, it's not clear, and staff hasn't evaluated whether a rezoning is really a viable alternative in this case. So on the balance of those considerations, we do find that the variance request does not meet the criteria for an undue hardship, despite there being some challenges with that significant setback on this property. In terms of the spirit and intent of the zoning ordinance, the stated purpose of C2 thoroughfare commercial is to encourage the functional grouping of commercial enterprises, and they would cater primarily to highway travelers. Generally, the larger setbacks for commercially zoned properties protect the public interest by providing convenient access to commercial uses. And in this instance, an auto-oriented business owner is saying that the functionality of the site and the aesthetics would be improved by locating structures nearer to the front property line. And though it's not a zoning ordinance, City Plan 2040 has a future land use map that designates the property as a city neighborhood area, and that does promote building structures closer to front property lines in urban form. The site where this is developed, developing an urban form wouldn't have such a significant setback requirement, and a variance would likely not be needed. So staff does find that the proposed location of the structures does meet the overall intent of the zoning district. Um, so while that front setback, the variance that's being requested doesn't appear to meet the minimum necessary to make adequate use of the property. We do find that constructing new structures could be done in an alternative configuration. We find that reasonable use of the land is maintained without the granting of a variance. And with that, we have not received any public comment on this item. We are recommending to deny the variance request, and I can stand for any questions that you might have.
Questions of staff?
I read this right that with a 50-foot, there's essentially no place that you can carport on that side, at least, is that right?
That side being like south. Yeah. I think you are reading that correctly. Yes. It appears board member Atkins Ori has her hand raised online. And
Can you hear me?
yep.
Okay. Are there any exemptions or setback reductions associated with like height of structure or anything like that? I know in some zonings and certain setbacks, that's an option. I don't know if we know anything about the height and size of the carports that are being asked for, but I didn't know if there was any of those exemptions or reductions available.
Sure. Yeah. So with accessory structures, typically they are allowed to be located closer to side and rear lot lines if they are under 10 feet in height. In cases where there is an accessory structure that's under 10 feet in height, they can be located within 3 feet of a side property line. Or sorry, I have that backwards. No, 3 feet of a side property line and 5 feet from a rear property line. I might need to double check that though.
But in this case, this is purely a front setback, correct?
Correct.
Any other questions, staff?
We might be writing on these unconditional lots or commercial signs, what this piece is. What qualifies as what's the strict definition of front?
Sure. Yeah, I might need to pull up that definition just to speak specifically. If you will just bear with me for one moment. So the way that a front setback is defined in the development code is it is a setback extending between side lot lines across the front of a lot adjoining a public street. Yeah, so in this case, this lot has fronts along both Happy Hollow. It has two fronts on the south side and the east side. So along Huntsville and Happy Hollow, those would both be considered front lot lines, and then the north and west lot lines would be considered sides.
Have we had situations like this where that creates the hardship, Blake? Where we have multiple fronts, thereby necessitating 50 feet on both sides setbacks?
I think you could consider that in determining whether there's a hardship that's unique to this property that's under consideration.
Thank you. That's my take on this, is that it's an unusual property, and staff noted in its findings, given the limitations on developable area because of the setbacks. Staff didn't find there was a hardship, but I seem to see that there's a hardship given the configuration of this property. It's unique to this property. And I think that would qualify as a hardship. On the second issue of the zoning issue, we're consistent with that. So we have it on the zoning issue. It meets the requirements. It's just a question of whether there's a hardship. And I think the unique characteristics of this property, it gives us a hook on hardship.
Disagree. I don't know if we're in discussion session, but I struggle with that. Two sides, two relative front setbacks, rezone or use in any other zones, next impossible, very difficult. Complete 50 foot up to what we're calling one of the front setbacks of the structure, unusable for this. I mean, I don't think that's arbitrary at all to consider that a unique hardship.
And Mr. Chair, if I may, if there are any specific questions for staff, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, you might ask the applicant. They might have some more information to provide as far as their exact nature of the request.
Right, can we hear from the applicant?
I have another question for staff. If you can hear me.
Sorry.
In some of the more urban form zoning, like is mentioned for the city plan 2040 for that particular area, where it would have like a build to requirement that would push it closer to the street, would there not also be like a minimum footage of frontage that would be expected to be built out at the same time? So like a certain percentage of the frontage would have to be constructed to be considered in that urban form to be really, what's the word I'm looking for? Like meeting the intent of the urban form. Not only would it push it to the street, but it would have to fill up a certain percentage of that frontage.
Sure. Yeah, I think what you're speaking to is in our urban form zoning districts, we do have a minimum buildable street frontage requirement, and that does vary based the percentage of the property's frontage that would need to be built out does vary based on the zoning district, but generally it's somewhere around about half of the property's frontage that is required to be occupied by structure.
Aaron, any other comments? May we hear from the applicant, please? Please come forward and state your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Clem Johnson, and my wife Kim and I own the property at 1798 East Huntsville Road, the corner of Happy Hollow and Huntsville. And it started out as a residence. We both are project-oriented people. And you can see in the picture that that's how we purchased it in 2001. That was after a couple of months of renovating the property, blocking in the outside entering restrooms and just starting to develop it. And then after several months of that, we added on a 1,100 square feet living space in the back. And it became our home. And we really enjoyed it, and we were both able to do our projects, and it was good. Now that picture shows the original 2-car garage in that original structure. And a lot of our stuff was happening there. I was working on old cars and trucks, and my wife liked to restore furniture. So that was kind of our lifestyle. We both had jobs as graphic artists, but this is where we chose to be. And after a period of time, it wasn't enough space, so we added on another shop. And we've always had it in our mind that we'd keep the 1940s look of the place. And that was the first shop we built, and that was an extension to the east of the original building. And there it is finished. And then everything we did was reclaimed windows, used doors, even the concrete block we used was, redone. Inside of that shop, you can kind of see that we were, once again, really detail oriented. And we kept that theme going through the whole place. And after we outgrew that shop, we added this one, which has a nice 40s feel to it with the arch top. And that was a considerable amount of money to build that building, but we kind of kept the aesthetics that we loved. And then the next shot shows the front of that building and some of the storage buildings we built. And in this large gravel area in the foreground, we built the third shop. And it was the biggest of all the shops. And through all these builds, we've always come to the city and done our permits and done everything what we thought was the right way. I think the thing I'm struggling with right now is 50-foot setback. I thought the setback was only 15 feet on the paved concrete area, but 50 foot in the gravel, which would be on the Happy Hollow side of the property. So I misunderstood the amount of the setback. There's no way we can do anything with a 50-foot setback. Then if you go to the next shot, this was my wife Kim's part. I wish she could be here, but she's in Comfort, Texas. Her parents are getting into assisted living and she couldn't be here. Go on to the next one, Ryan. That shows the construction and the new shop that we just built. That was just 2 years ago, I think we finished that one. But Kim's part, in the next slide, was the gardens. We have a vegetable garden. We used old pickup beds to make flower gardens, and that was always something that we had in mind. We planted lots of trees and shrubs. We tried to make the place homey, and that is the house side of it. And that's really an important part of the property. And yeah, could we put buildings out there? Probably, but it would lose so much in doing that, and it separates the work and the business of car restoration from the life and the home. And who would want to go all the way around a building to get tools when they're already right there? So you can start just running through. We were on an HGTV show in 2004. I don't know if any of you guys saw that, but they had a series called Building Character. And it's about people who've reclaimed commercial structures and made their home out of it. And they came to Fayetteville to originally film the people who have the laundromat down Mountain Street that turned it into their home. And also, I think, the church that's behind Washington School. But the church backed out, and so they called a chamber, and the chamber pointed them our direction, and they came over. They filmed for 3 days. For 15 minutes of airtime, they're filming for 3 days. Anyway, so we got a lot of kind of notoriety from that, and that helped the business and the truck restorations. And we got noticed for the trucks and for the quality of builds we did. Unfortunately, the trucks take a lot of time. You can imagine completely disassembling all the way to a bare frame, the thousands and thousands of parts you'd have, and reconditioning each one as you build the truck back. They cost a lot of money, they take a lot of time, and they use a lot of space. So in all those shops, we're packed full. And the money on the restoration business, not that that's a big deal except to me, comes in slow. Comes in over a period of 6 months. You might get a check to go forward on someone's project. And just to cover the monthly bills, we had to come up with another solution. So that's when we decided maybe what we could do is kind of quick turn repair and service of vehicles, and still keep it in the vein of classic cars and trucks. But if a guy needs a brake job, or if a guy wants to have a new motor put in, or just, the more quick turn jobs kind of really helped us out financially. So that was the direction we started to take, and we got on social media and kind of played that up, and it wasn't long before they were packed outside the gates just waiting to get in. Another factor is a good friend of mine, Dave Kelsey, had Performance Automotive, and he passed away. And Jim at Jim's Garage out south of town had a stroke, and he retired. And the old guy at May's Garage even retired. So it was all coming to us. And I had no way to handle it. And one aspect is people who bring their vehicles to us, they entrust us to take care of them. We not only fix them up, but we have to prevent them from being damaged, and sun and just the rain and the elements, you know, can harm their baby. That's their family heirloom. So we had to figure out a way to protect them. And the carports were going to be the best way. They're well built, solid steel, 21 by 24 foot. And if you, am I getting a little bit ahead of you, I think, Ryan? Have you gotten to go on to the carports? Yeah, there it is. This I cut from the brochure of the manufacturer. It's made over in Oklahoma, and it's bolted to our concrete slab, and that's very important. That's the most secure, most safe way. They're guaranteed to hold the average snowfall and protect you from the high winds in Arkansas. It's the perfect thing to protect these vehicles. Okay. See if I can catch up with you now. Yeah, go on to the, yeah, there you go. You can see this is taken from the street, Huntsville Road, directly across. And you can see in the top pictures the car covers that we have to use to help protect the vehicles. And they don't really do a good job. They blow in the wind, they get wet, they're labor intensive in having to remove and put them back on. And then the lower picture, I just pulled off the car covers, and you could see what it would be like with the carports over those 4 vehicles. And they're large enough carports. Employees can work around them, and they would also be protected from sun, rain, from the elements. Okay, go to the next shot. That's the bags, the ugly car bags. They had their purpose, and we've been using them for years. And that's my hardship right there. To tell you the truth, those things are not good for these vehicles. And you can see the little island with the gas pumps and the original Sinclair sign pole. We don't put the original sign up because we don't sell gas, but that's something we want to keep. That just has a nice feel to us and part of the aesthetic of the whole place. All the buildings we've done, everything has got a certain feel that I guess we like, and we like to live with. Go to the next one there, Ryan. Another thing we do is a toy drive. Once a year in November, we have car people come in, we do a car show. They bring in toys, and a lot of people will drive by and hand off toys, and it's gotten to be real big. This is our 12th annual this year in November. Okay, next slide. That was last year's collection of bicycles. There was 45 bicycles there and enough other toys to fill a 20-foot box truck. And we take those to the local grade schools, and they put them in a storeroom, and then they'll have the impoverished families come in and select toys for their kids that are in that grade school, but also take some home for the ones they have at home. And it's just one of those feel-good things that we do, and I don't think we could ever not do. I can imagine those being protected a lot better by a carport than that tarp. Okay, next. This is the original plat plus the new buildings we've added, and I know it's not real clear, but if you go to the next one, maybe I can make it clearer. I got my Crayolas out. If you see the blue area, that is basically the flow. Now, the 2 yellow rectangles are the proposed carports. And you can see if you came in through the Happy Hollow end in the lower part, and you can drive up, and the turning radius is perfect to get into that 1-car garage or back in to either of the carports on that lower side. And you have complete drive-through capability all the way to the Huntsville side, the other entrance. And that too, the carport is right opposite the 2-car garage. So you have a good flow, and up to the other 2 new shops. There's just, can you see the dark green line? The dark green line represents the 15-foot setback that I thought I had. And if I put those 2 carports on the south side of that green line, they're right in the middle of the flow. no vehicles could get around them. It just wouldn't work. So that too is another hardship in my mind, is that we really can't get through the property and be functional and efficient with our work if we're constantly moving car covers and having to work around other structures. Let me see where I am here. Yeah, I guess I'm at the hardship part now. When I went in to apply for the permit, I talked to a lot of the people that work in the department, and they seemed to think that I had to come up with the hardships. So I guess that's the trip word that we have to use. And I mean, my number one hardship is providing safe working conditions for my guys. Out, you know, this 95 degrees in the sun, it wears on us. They're not wanting to be there. Rains, you know, they're not wanting to work out in the rain without protection. And we tried the temporary canopies like you get out at Sam's, and they're okay as far as the sunshade, but if it rains, they're like a funnel. They just take the water and collapse. So they wouldn't work, and we ended up buying a dozen of those over the years. But protecting the customers' vehicles is another hardship that, I mean, that's something that we just have to do. We can't not do that and stay in business. Another hardship we feel like we have is the efficiency of our work. We lose a lot of time, a lot of billable time by having to cover and uncover vehicles constantly. Takes two guys about 30 minutes to uncover a vehicle and stow away the car cover and then put it back on. If someone were to drive by and want to see the quality of our work, we have to uncover it. They're not right there where they could be seen. We have to take those covers off time and time again. To me, that's a great loss of revenue. And another loss to us is that, and there's one here today, is if you came in with your car, your classic car, and wanted us to work on it, I would be happy to do that, but I would have to look at the weather. I'd have to look at the 7-day forecast and find a couple of nice days where we could do it, because we don't have any protected place to put them. And I would tell them, well, if you get a car cover, we can probably work something out. So now they're buying car covers. It just isn't a very good system. So another thing is that curb appeal, which probably brings in as many customers to our shop as anything. And driving by and seeing all those ugly car bags is not curb appeal. To me, the curb appeal would be some nice low profile carports that have great visibility through them, that protect the vehicles, but you can see the vehicles. And that in essence makes it a showroom instead of a bunch of car bags. I don't know if that's enough hardships for you guys, but if you look at the little folder, can I pass these out?
Mr. Chair, I think that is up to you.
Okay. I also have a manufacturer's flyer on the carports themselves. But the one I wanted to draw your attention to is the last page before the letter that a customer wrote. It's with pictures 9 and 10. Shows the drainage ditch that's on the Huntsville side, which we do consider the front of the property. That's our main entrance, and that's what our address is established on. But you'll see on the left side, you'll see the chain link fence. And then on the right side is Huntsville Road. there's 30 feet from the edge of Huntsville Road to the property line, which is the chain link fence. And that's, I mean, we've had cars out of control aimed at our place, but that drainage ditch stopped them. So I think that's a major factor, and that's unused space, that 30 feet by however long it is, that we maintain, and at least once a year it floods. And there's also all the utilities run down by that drainage ditch. And occasionally an old water line will burst and we'll have a 50-foot geyser outside. So I know there was talk at one time with Ryan about us trying to get some of that land and move some of it that way, but I'm not real sure I want to own that drainage ditch. And if you look at the number 10 picture, there is a sidewalk that runs just alongside the fence and that the city redid, and it stops at the green wall, which is the edge of our driveway. So there's no sidewalk, there's no walkway or walk through that goes all the way down Huntsville Road on the north side of the street, our side of the street. It's all on the south side. Nothing all the way almost up to Wood Avenue is there any sidewalks. So really that sidewalk is also a bit of a barrier. And I just can't see how we can do it without the carports. And I don't see how the carports can be anywhere else than where we want them to be. On the cover of your brochure, you'll see that new logo, which I really like, that Fayetteville open heart, open mind. My wife and I, we believe in that. We believe in Fayetteville. And we like to be part of it. We kind of actually enjoy being part of the diversity of this city. And I know your ordinances and setbacks are designed to protect from I don't know what, but from whatever. But also you guys have to be kind of flexible, you know, to meet the needs of your citizens. And that's why I'm here, looking for that. Thanks. Good to go?
I do, Bill, have a few questions. We can do it here, I guess, of Ryan and Blake, if that's all right. We loop y'all into our discussion. Any objection? So the 50 foot, I mean, it's measured from property line, right?
That's correct.
How do they have the, and I promise I'm trying to piece together a few things. How do they have the driveway piece across the ditch? They have an easement for that, or?
I believe that driveway across the ditch is entirely in the right of way.
Just wonder who built it? How'd they get it? Do they have private rights to it? Is it public then? Anybody, I guess, can park on Clem's driveway?
That I don't have a great answer for.
It was grandfathered in. It's been there as long as we've owned the property. And then when they redid the corner of Happy Hollow on Huntsville Road, they actually repoured that driveway, city did, and the sidewalk.
Okay. Interesting.
I think that would function just like any driveway entrance that's in the right of way. All driveway entrances are in a right of way.
And the frontage definition again, Ryan, I know we got these two frontages and or Blake. Is that literally adjacent to or touching a public road? What's again the definition of that?
Sure. Yeah. The front of a property is defined as the side of the property extending between side lot lines along a public street. So this is considered a front property line because it is alongside the public street, Huntsville.
Okay, not directly adjacent because you've got a right-of-way ditch, but I guess we're calling it right-of-way of the public street.
Yeah, the street itself is also in the public right of way.
Well, as far as comments go, I think Clem had a lot of hardships. I'm afraid a lot of them might not be due to circumstances unique to the individual property, but Bill, like you had said, I do think there is an interesting hardship that is unique to the property, which is not arbitrary, and that is two fronts. Two fronts, no side. That's put 250 foot on both, so no real side setbacks, or at least maybe one side, one rear. What are his other setbacks? If he's got two fronts, what's that make the other two?
So this property has two fronts, the south and the east, and then the other two property lines are considered side setbacks, and both of those, based on the adjoining, it varies again based on the adjoining zoning, but in this case, both of the other property lines have a 0 foot setback.
Okay.
I know that like rezoning hasn't been looked at real hard on this property, but would this property use be compatible with like a urban thoroughfare zoning where they could take advantage of the ability to build up on the street frontage? And it seems like with the carports, and then maybe we could call out the sculptural existing gas things and signage that's almost like sculpture because it's vintage and it's art at this point. I wonder if that wouldn't occupy enough of the frontage to qualify between the carports and the sculptural aspects. I didn't know if that was a rezoning option that could possibly be looked at, and if that was a compatible use for that, for like a UT zone.
And I guess just so I'm understanding clearly, is your question is if one of the urban form zone districts would be considered compatible or potentially an alternative at this location?
Yeah, for the existing use, because I mean, obviously, a car repair shop is only compatible with certain zones. I was thinking, but I can't remember off the top of my head if UT was one of those. But I feel like UT was one of the ones that has almost everything compatible with it, and that would give the urban form build at the street option, and potentially with everything that he's wanting to put at the street. Be able to meet that total percentage of frontage being built out as well, and kind of be like a one size fits all solution.
Sure. Yeah, and I guess just tailoring that specifically to urban thoroughfare. So in urban thoroughfare, there is a requirement that structures occupy 50% of the lot width. And that lot width would be a measurement of both of those frontages along a public street. So in this case, and a sign wouldn't necessarily be considered a structure that's occupying a portion of that frontage. So I think two carports are unlikely to be able to meet that 50% requirement. It is worth noting that, if it were to be rezoned, the structures on the property would just be they would be considered legal non-conforming structures. So basically, I think the challenge there for the applicant is that any new development would have to occur in that build to zone towards the front property line.
The applicant has a question.
Something else that I think that screams is that these carports are bolted to the concrete with anchor bolts. Could be considered temporary, portable, and not necessarily structures that are there, like the fence. The fence was put in concrete on the property line, and I got permits for that 10 years ago. I'm just wanting to push these, I guess, temporary carports and bolt them down up to that fence. I don't know if that makes any difference, but it's a problem.
Thank you.
I guess that's a question I have just for clarification, is what the definition of a structure that would, where a setback requirement would come into play. Because I definitely consider the same thing if this doesn't have a permanent foundation. I think we've discussed this before, but just for clarification, what triggers the building setback restriction as far as the structure?
Sure. Yeah, so a structure is anything permanent that is above 30 inches in height. Fences are not considered structures per the Unified Development Code.
Can you fit cars under 30 inches?
Well, if there's no further comments,
No, I think that I think the main hardship here would be the excessive right of way, but I don't know that we can consider that as a hardship because I assume that that excessive right of way has been there for years and years. I know it exceeds it by, I think, neighborhood link? If I remember what the master street plan designation for the street, I believe it's neighborhood link, which is 67 maximum width of right of way. And it looks like it's 100 feet wide. There's also sewer lines and water lines in that same right of way. So if right of way vacation were to be explored, I don't think you'd be able to get more than 5 feet. So I understand. I think to me that's the hardship. I don't know if it reaches the threshold that we have to keep up to grant a variance for a building setback, unfortunately.
You're talking, Jason, just on the one frontage side, the 50 or 100 on that one side?
Correct. On Huntsville Road, the right of way exceeds the master street plan right of way by 33 feet. So that's the only hardship that I think I see here, but I also don't know if that does reach the threshold because from what I can tell, it looks like it's been an existing condition for years. Just the way that's just kind of the way that I'm looking at it.
well, I will move to approve BOA 2022-0011, subject to the staff conditions.
I would second that.
We have a motion and a second. May I have a vote, please?
Sure. And Mr. Chair, just so I'm understanding correctly, this would be a motion to approve, subject to the conditions that are in the staff report.
That's correct.
Subject to your conditions if approved.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. Carson,
Yes.
Feiner,
Yes.
Steiger Muck,
Yes.
Adkins Ori,
Yes.
Young.
Yes.
Motion to approve passes.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is BOA 2022-0013. May we have a staff report, please?
Good afternoon. So the subject property on this case is at 2015 South Vale Avenue. It is located just north of South Cato Springs Road's intersection with South Razorback Road. The property is currently under review as a large-scale development, and it also received a conditional use permit approval from the Planning Commission for a multi-family development under CUP 2021-054. The property's current zoning is NSG, Neighborhood Services General, which was approved by City Council in February of 2022. The property up until that point was previously zoned CS, Community Services. So the request before you today, the applicant is actually appealing a determination by the Zoning and Development Administrator, that's myself, regarding an interpretation of UDC section 16119D2. Which states that the lot area minimum for a two-family or more is 3,000 square feet per dwelling unit. The applicant is contesting that use unit 26, multifamily, would be classified as other uses under this zoning district, which does not have an associated minimum lot area. The applicant is also arguing that the ordinance is in conflict with the overall allowable density as governed by the zoning district. So again, you can kind of see the chart there that's pulled from the zoning regulations that shows, I guess it's a little small, apologies for that, the applicant is contesting again that use unit 26 would fall under this category of all other uses. Staff issued a determination that use unit 26 would fall under this category of 2-family or more, which has a requirement of 3,000 square feet per dwelling unit. So staff does find that the lot area minimum for 2-family or more at 3,000 square feet per dwelling unit would apply to any residential use above single family, and that the language of all other uses would be applied to non-residential uses. Multifamily, otherwise known as use unit 26, would classify as a residential use and is described as more than 4 attached units in the Unified Development Code. The density maximum of 18 units per acre as permitted in the NSG zoning district is a maximum allowable and not a given allowance at the site. It is true that mathematically a single 2, 3, or 4-family or multifamily development would not be able to meet the maximum given the minimum lot area requirement, but that discrepancy would ultimately be a policy decision for the city council to make if they were to evaluate an ordinance change. We also did want to point out that there are some additional residential uses that are permitted in the NSG zoning district, such as use unit 44 or cluster housing. We maintain that that use unit has a specific density and lot area limitations that are found in a specific portion of code that speaks to that use specifically in 164.22. And would therefore not be subject to the minimum lot area requirement as outlined in 161.19. That portion of code outlines a lot area minimum of 750 square feet per unit and a land area per dwelling unit of 750 square feet per dwelling unit. So at this time we did not hear any public comment on this item, and though we did field a couple questions from a neighbor to the south just this afternoon. She didn't have any comments in opposition or in support of the request, but more questions than anything. We are recommending that you deny BOA 2022-013, finding in favor of staff's determination on the item. And the city attorney's office also did issue a memo on the item, who I'm sure can answer any questions you might have about that at this time as well. I'm happy to answer any additional questions you have. Thank you.
Any questions of staff?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'm going to have to recuse myself from this decision, as this is actually my project.
Oh.
And Mr. Branson, or Mr. Harris is my client, so.
I think that's prudent. Thank you. Anyone else?
Questions?
Yes.
We had this come up before, confusion or. Mr. Carson, will you turn on your microphone, please? Thanks.
Have we had this ever come up before in these categories, confusing any of residential mixed with the other uses, or how this fits into the categories for lot minimums?
I don't believe it's come up on this specific case. I know that I have fielded questions about the difference between a density requirement and the lot area minimum requirement in other portions of code. I know it does come up in other, we have that distinction in other zoning districts in RSF4 and above. Really almost any of our zoning districts that have residential use have an associated density allowance as well as a lot area minimum.
And so our lot area minimum chart, 2-family or more, the intent of that is to apply to all residential. Is that right?
That's our interpretation. The staff's interpretation is that the I guess for lack of a better word, plain English reading of 2-family or more would include anything above, anything above a duplex. It would include a 3-family, 4-family, or a 5-family.
Anything else residential?
Yeah. anything residential, yeah. And then all other uses would be maintained for anything non-residential.
Okay. Any other questions, staff? Thank you. May we hear from the applicant, please? Would you state your name and address for the record, please?
Good afternoon. My name is Will Kelstrom and I represent the applicant on this project. Address is 1106 West Poplar Street in Rogers. So a little bit of introduction and history here. The applicant is proposing to build 63 townhomes on 3.5 acres, which comes out to exactly 18 units per acre. So Jessie covered a little bit of this in her report, but the property was previously zoned community services. Community services has a 10 to 25 foot build-to line. This is a triple frontage lot with a 50-foot right-of-way through the middle, and it's trapezoid shaped. So with a 10-foot build-to line, or rather a 10-foot setback line, we lose a pretty significant amount of land that's buildable. So under NSG, the build-to line is 0 to 25 feet. We found that that would be more favorable towards us. We had a pre-submission meeting with staff in which we showed them this plan that is attached in your packet that's at 18 units an acre on 3.5 acres. At that time, they told us that they would not be able to support Neighborhood Services General due to the fact that the property was zoned community services under the Fayette Junction plan, and they didn't want to go against the Fayette Junction plan, which we understand. At that time, no one told us anything or raised any red flags about the fact that our 18 units an acre was in excess of what would be allowed under Neighborhood Services General. So ultimately, we obtained our Neighborhood Services General. At the Planning Commission meeting, we had then obtained a conditional use permit for multifamily, which is allowed conditionally under NSG. The reason why we needed a conditional use permit is because townhomes more than 4 attached is considered multifamily under the Fayetteville Development Code. We are building 5 to 7 plexes, therefore we needed the conditional use permit for multifamily. So we obtained the conditional use permit. When we went to submit our large-scale development plan, staff determined that our project was in excess of the allowable density and told us that we didn't comply, and this is why we're here today. So again, the development is 3.5 acres with 63 units, which is exactly 18 units an acre. Neighborhood Services General provides that the max density is 18 units an acre, that the minimum lot area per dwelling unit for single family is 4,000 square feet. The minimum lot area per dwelling unit for 2 family and more is 3,000 square feet. And the lot area per dwelling unit for all other uses is none. It's the staff's contention that 2 family or more, in fact, means that all residential uses are subject to the 2 family or more requirement, despite the fact that the code does not say anything about all other residential uses. It simply says 2 family or more. Our argument, which I'm about to put forth, is that the lot area per dwelling unit provisions in Neighborhood Services General are ambiguous. That staff has taken an interpretation that at best renders the density maximum insignificant and at worst renders it void completely. And that based on the design of you guys' code generally, the legislative intent is that the lot area per dwelling unit for multifamily under Neighborhood Services General is none. So multifamily is a different use from all of the residential uses, and we can point this out in the code. Under the Fayetteville Development Code, single family is use unit 1, 2 family is use unit 8, 3 family is use unit 9, 4 family is use unit 10, and then 4 family or more, or more than 4 attached is use unit 26, which is multifamily. From this, we can tell that the City Council views multifamily as a different use than all other residential uses, or in particular, different from less than 5 attached townhomes. Or else it would have organized the code differently. It would maybe classified townhomes as its own use rather than separating it out into a multifamily use. Multifamily is not allowed by right under Neighborhood Services General. It's only allowed by condition. Again, it's treated different than the rest of these uses. And then just in a general layman sense, multifamily buildings are taller, that generate more noise, they would generate more traffic, more neighbors complain about multifamily. I'm sure we all know this. Regardless of how you might set them apart, we all know that multifamily is different than single family. So that poses the question then, why would multifamily be allowed by condition in Neighborhood Services General only to treat it identically to all the other uses? So part of my argument is that the code is ambiguous, and I think that just the mere fact that we're here today shows that it is ambiguous, because we clearly, staff and I and my client, have come to two different readings on this. It's this reason that we're asking you guys to interpret the code. So again, the lot area per dwelling unit, or the land area per dwelling unit under Neighborhood Services General is divided by uses. It's divided by single family, two family or more, and all other uses. Again, multifamily is a different use than those two. It's separated out under your code. When I read this code for the first time, it was fairly evident to me that multifamily would be treated under all other uses. In just a layman's sense, I don't think it's really common for people to describe an apartment building as a 55 family unit or 55 family building. It's called multifamily. There's duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. After that, we kind of just consider it multifamily. So again, when I read this, it was fairly clear to me that multifamily would be under all other uses. And the fact that staff sees it differently, I think, lends itself to the fact that you can read this two different ways. I think it is ambiguous. So the Arkansas Supreme Court has ruled on how statutes should be interpreted, and I've got some of this language in front of me today. When the language of a statute is plain and unambiguous, this court determines legislative intent from the ordinary meaning of the language used. In considering the meaning of a statute, we construe it just as it reads, giving the words their ordinary and usually accepted meaning in common language. The interpretation that I'm arguing for doesn't require you guys to convert two family or more into all residential uses. All it asks is that you put multifamily under all other uses, because it's a different use under you guys' code. To me, that is a plain and logical reading of the code. We construe the statute so that no word is left void, superfluous, or insignificant, and we give meaning and effect to every word in the statute if possible. So again, the maximum density requirement under Neighborhood Services General is 18 units an acre. Staff has essentially determined this is meaningless and that you can't meet it under any circumstances. In other words, staff is substituting their own interpretation of the code from what the city council has already decided should be law. I'm not going to sit up here and say that if a code says you can have 18 units an acre, then a developer should be able to build 18 units an acre under any circumstances. I know what a density maximum requirement is. If we were building single family homes, I think it'd be pretty obvious we'd be stuck at 4,000 square feet per dwelling unit, and we can't get to that 18 units an acre. But it's confusing to me that it would say 18 units an acre only for there to be no practical way for you to actually reach that. It kind of makes me ask, why is it even in the code? If the language of a statute is clear and unambiguous and conveys a clear and definite meaning, it is unnecessary to resort to the rules of statutory interpretation. Like I said earlier, I think that the code is ambiguous. And again, the fact that we're here, I think, shows that. So because it's ambiguous, I'd say that we need to kind of look to some of these other things that the Supreme Court has done to interpret statutes. One of these is, we will not give statutes a literal interpretation if it leads to absurd consequences that are contrary to legislative intent. In my opinion, if the only way to get to a density maximum requirement is either through some kind of obscure way under the cluster housing code, or it's impossible to meet that max at all, that's pretty absurd. Why is it in there if you can't meet it? Lastly, it is axiomatic that this court strives to reconcile statutory provisions to make them consistent, harmonious, and sensible. The maximum under an NSG is 18 units an acre. The way staff is reading it, the maximum density is 14.5 units an acre. That is a direct conflict. Those two are irreconcilable. And that's all I've got. So if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And I did want to add one thing. I know that you guys sometimes, when you're trying to decide whether to grant a variance, one of the things you ask is whether a rezone could fix the problem. So I went back into the code, and under community services, the build to line is 10 to 25. However, under you guys' code for neighborhood services, the 10 to 25 build to restriction, under that, 10 is considered the setback and 25 is considered the build to. In other words, you must build at least up to 25 feet from the street, but you may not build closer than 10 feet. So it operates as actually both a setback and a build to restriction. So a rezone to community services would not necessarily make this project work under you guys' code. And that's all I've got. If you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant?
Well, you had mentioned some authority you had on, I know, statutory construction and where that fits with, well, trickling down to the ordinances. But I'd mentioned, I thought, something about in the event of ambiguity, that there's a default deferral requirement to some kind of max usage or no restriction. Did I make that up, or? I don't remember that. That's why I was asking if you have that. It'd be great for us to include it or see it.
I do not have that particular bit of case law, but I do know that either in Arkansas or in similar jurisdictions, there has been a deferral to interpret the statute as liberally as possible to give max entitlements on the property. The exact citation to that case, I do not have in front of me today.
Any other questions? Aaron?
I don't have any at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's bring it back to the board members for discussion.
Blake, I mean, are we acting in a judicial capacity? Do we have authority judicially to interpret? There's a few things going on here, and I know that often we're here for variances. Now and again, I guess someone can bring an interpretation as your appeal of that, and want to be careful, or at least try to voice our caution on what pieces of this are really just, whether they make sense or not, matters of counsel. And what pieces of this, if there is an ambiguity, that we have judicial authority, I guess, to decide on, at least as written. Is that right?
You are sitting as a quasi-judicial board, and I'll read you what the statute says about the Board of Adjustment. It says the board shall have the following functions. A is hear appeals from the decision of the administrative officers in respect to the enforcement and application of the ordinance, and may affirm or reverse in whole or in part the decision of the administrative officer. And then the second part is request for variances from the zoning requirements, which is what you typically see.
A few pieces of this, I want y'all's thoughts on it, but you know, the piece on the max units per acre, I've seen that in 60 municipalities. It's annoying and I hate it. But, I mean, it's not an entitlement. It's max allowance. And oftentimes you can't achieve them. It's just a tease, but it is what it is. And if I don't think that there's nothing ambiguous about that. It's just a max. And if someone wants to change it, I mean, I don't think we can do that. That's for the council. Because it says what it says. As for though the other point, or the first point, I do sympathize a bit with interpretation. I want to make sure that whatever we be deciding, we are weighing out something we can weigh out. I think Jesse's read it clear and given a good presentation on it. One of the main reasons I sympathize, I've also seen this in 60 different municipalities, And I think no fault of our staff, but I've seen it clarified and elaborated quite a bit in some other jurisdictions. I think the piece Mr. Kelstrom said I can appreciate about these use units and what may have been intended. I think use units are a little arbitrary with regard to where you fit this into then the lot minimums. I don't know if that helps their argument, but I do think that the three categories, not going further and adding in residential pieces. I think multifamily is residential. We know it. But boy, when I see these charts and they don't elaborate or add the catchphrases, two family or more, all residential in parentheses, which I've seen a lot of times. All other uses, parentheses, commercial or industrial. And I know it's not for today, but I wish there's something we could clarify or beef that up at the council level. Maybe we make a recommendation later, but I do think there's some issue. I think Jesse had every right and our team to interpret as they see it, but I think there are some good holes in what fits under the lot area minimum. Again, mainly just because of what I've seen in some other jurisdictions that I wish could be a lot clearer. So I've got to sympathize on some ambiguity of where this fits in. Again, I don't think the 18-foot, just because that renders it impossible, means there's some ambiguity and we should do something different. No, that's just, it says what it says. Council can take that up if they want to change that, but I'll leave that there to simmer for a minute.
The 18 units per acre, I think staff has shown that is actually achievable though with the cluster housing allowances. I think the cluster housing, it's like 750 square foot per house. And I think, or per unit, and that would be actually a lot more than 18 units per acre. And so by putting the 18 units per acre stipulation there, that brings it back down because they can't, if it's a by right use, which in this case it is, that brings it back down to that 18 units per acre. And so it is an achievable density with a specific housing type. And not every housing type is going to be able to meet that same density with what's with how the code's written with the various minimum or maximum, minimum lot sizes. And then also on the wording of the uses, it would have been, just as easy to say 2 to 4 family as opposed to 2 or more family if 2 to 4 was what was meant. So I don't feel like it's unclear, and especially because there are so many non-residential uses listed under the by right uses and the conditional uses. There's the businesses and the sidewalk cafes and all of those. Those totally make sense to be the other uses. And everything that's something family is covered under 1 family and 2 to more family. I feel like staff has made a clear interpretation of the language in this case.
Thank you, Aaron. Any other comments, questions?
What do you think? Or Bill?
I think you raised a good point about, what you've seen in other code before. And to me, like in all of our time on the board, I can't ever remember a time when our legal people weighed in on this as well, like with their determination and decision on, this is why we would say this. And to me, the fact that there's not precedent, like nobody's ever challenged this before in all of the different units that we have across the city. And I agree with Aaron, it's pretty clear in my opinion. And then given what you said about other code and what you've seen before, I think that adds to the clearness in my mind.
Well, yeah, for what it's worth, I agree completely with Aaron and what Lindsay said on the 18, it even is achievable. My point, even if it's not, still don't think there's anything we can do about it. I see that everywhere. On this piece, my point was what I've seen in other jurisdictions to me has made it a lot more clear when they've elaborated and done more than 2 or more family. They've done 2, 3 multifamily. They've had a few more categories. I do think ours here could use a little work. The fact that we're here, but to beef that up and add some of the multifamily pieces as if it wasn't crystal clear. Reasonable minds can differ. Is that really adding all remaining residentials? I think that was the intent. versus all other uses that are separate. I just know I've seen it with a lot more words that have made it a lot more clear. I hate that it's not here. So I still think there's some open-endedness just to the lot area minimum piece, not the 18, but that's just me.
I have a few remarks if you guys would love to hear them.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you had to say.
I have a few remarks on you guys' comments and discussion if you guys would be willing to entertain them.
Any more comments from him?
Yes, sure, come forward.
I want to make clear that I'm not arguing that 18 units an acre is a density entitlement by any means. I understand that's a density maximum and not everybody is entitled to it. But what I will say is that when you have a land area per dwelling unit, requirement, that means you have to have that much space under every unit. When you extrapolate that out to an acre and you take 43,560 and divide it by 3,000 square feet, that caps the density at 14.5. So the land area per dwelling unit, even though it does not state it specifically, that is a density cap. And so in effect, the statute gives two different density caps. And were it not the case that staff was arguing that this applies to all residential uses, then I would say that's fine. But since it's applied to all residential uses, you have an effective cap at 14.5 no matter which use you use, which means that they do stand in direct conflict to each other. They're both restrictions, and one says 18 and one says 14.5. I'd like to address this other point about cluster housing. If you look closely in the staff report, the only way that you can obtain 18 units an acre with a residential development under NSG is with a cluster housing development that is exactly 2/3 of an acre. That's one scenario. A cluster housing development on 2/3 of an acre is the only situation in which you can meet that density requirement. And so again, when I start discussing case law about we will not give statutes a literal interpretation if it leads to absurd consequences, I think that's kind of absurd, that there's only one way to meet the density maximum in one specific area with a specific lot size and a specific housing type. And I think it's highly unlikely that the city council, when they said we're gonna limit NSG to 18 units an acre, said, oh, we better take that above 14.5 so that we can make sure we can have 18 units an acre on a 2/3 of an acre cluster housing development. I don't think that's what they had in mind. And the other point that I want to stress is that the ambiguity doesn't come from the density maximum itself. What it comes from is how these land area per dwelling unit regulations or requirements are separated by usage. And multifamily is a fundamentally different use than attached townhomes. And once you get over 4 units, once you get 4 attached townhomes, that becomes a multifamily usage. And I think that it is entirely reasonable to think that multifamily might fall under all other uses. It's a different development pattern. They're taller, they're stacked on top of each other. It's, in my mind, it makes perfect sense why you might have a none requirement for multifamily buildings. But those are just my comments. Thank you all for letting me get up twice.
Thank you. Just for the record, I wanted to mention that the city attorney, our assistant city attorney, Blake Pennington, provided us with an opinion letter that's in our packet, and I think it was very well written. I appreciate it, Blake. So would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve BOA 2022-13.
Do I have a second?
I'm not smart enough to understand Lindsay's motion. I need help. So this being not a approval for a variance,
We,
what is it, Lindsay, what are you?
Would it be a motion to grant the appeal of the applicant?
oh, sorry. I guess that would be the motion that I'm trying to make. But also, just to confirm, we are supposed to motion in favor of things no matter what, right?
That is generally how the Board of Adjustment has operated, and then that motion, in order to carry, requires 3 votes to pass. And if it doesn't get 3 votes, then it fails.
Yeah, so the affirmative vote from Lindsay is motion to approve their appeal and adopt their proposed interpretation, right?
Correct, but she's also not tied to.
Oh, sure. I'm just making sure that
Yes.
this is an odd one,
Yes.
since we're dealing with an interpretation issue. Just want to make sure we know what we're voting on.
Since the applicant has the burden of proving their case, it makes sense to make that motion to grant the appeal and then have the higher voting requirement on that side.
So in that case, do we have a second?
A second.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. Vote, please.
I have a motion to grant the appeal with the first from Steiger Muck and a second from Carson. Carson,
Oh, yes.
Feiner,
Yes.
Steiger Muck,
No.
Adkins Ori,
No.
Young.
He recused.
Oh, thank you.
Recused.
The motion to approve fails.
Jason, some of us tried. You can take that up with your client. Your recusal.
So we have a 2-2 vote, is that correct?
That is correct.
Tie vote, and therefore the motion fails.
The motion fails.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. This was a tough one.
I do think that council should look at the language if you know, if there is some ambiguity in some of y'all's eyes, then I don't know what it takes to get something moving on that, but
I agree with
Might
Aaron
be.
on that.
might be worth it.
Yeah, I
Like
think,
I said, if we can make a motion or need to do that new business or next time, just because I do think we can clarify, I get it. Some have said that they think it's clear enough, but geez, we can always beef it up if that's an appropriate motion to make at another time. I wish it could be looked at.
I don't think we need a motion, do we, Blake? I think we can just ask Blake
Sure.
to refer the matter to the city council.
We'll
based
talk
on
about that
what
with
happened
staff.
today.
Sure.
Thank,
Like, if there is a tie vote on a motion to approve, that means the motion to approve fails. Does that amount to a denial?
Yes.
Okay.
there being no further business before the Board of Adjustment, the meeting is adjourned.